convicted felon. They're not used to in their businesses having a CEO who's a convicted felon. They're not used to hiring convicted felon. Think it's great to have a convicted felon as the coach of their kids' little league baseball team or pastor of their church or whatever. I just feel like it's something that could hit home a little bit, but it is a kind of a proof, isn't it, that he's not, it's not just the tweets, right? He actually carried out a conspiracy to violate the law.
Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. It's Monday, June 3rd, and finally we're back with Bill Kristol. He had a little holiday, then we had a Memorial Day, and I know you guys have been missing his always uplifting takes and historical anecdotes. Bill, welcome back.
Yeah, it's nice of you to claim that people have been missing it. I've gotten sort of the opposite impression, but it's good to be back anyway.
I don't know if that's true. Come on. All right, so we have the Trump verdict, which we discussed on Friday with Ben and Ron. But I guess I'm just curious about your top level thoughts here. Haven't had a weekend to let it all settle, and what you think about both the political and substantive fallout from the verdict.
So on the political side, I think the people who said this could have some effect are a little bit vindicated, or at least for now, having a little bit the better of the argument than the people who just poo-pooed it all. There are 3 polls. All of them have Biden gaining a point or 2, which, is very small. It's margin of error, but they're all in the same direction. I think the reaction of the Trump campaign, and you've talked about this, and we should talk more about it maybe, it has been so over the top. And they're over the top on everything, so it's hard to maybe make too much of a conclusion from this, but it's not something they're relaxed about. I guess I would put it that way, and it feels to me like they're very worried, and that some weak Trump supporters, uncertain voters, undecided voters could be swayed by this. The ferocity of the response to Larry Hogan, who's running for Senate in Maryland, who has some interest in distancing himself from Trump, and whom you'd think the Republican Party, and even Trump, not that he's a great party guy, but still would want to have a Republican senator if possible there, even if he's not going to be totally reliable. The ferocity with which they jumped on him when he's issued a perfectly anodyne, vanilla statement about respecting the rule of law was pretty striking. And it was Licevita, that's Trump. He's not just doing that as a random, sort of.
Well, it was more actually. I was going to say this for a little bit.
Go ahead.
Let's just talk about Larry Hogan. Let's just do that right now because we have the audio of what Lara Trump, who's a Trump family member, in addition to Licevita, said about his, as you mentioned, anodyne statement that we respect the justice system. Let's listen.
Does the Republican National Committee support Larry Hogan for Senate?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I don't support what he just said there. I think it's ridiculous. And I think anybody who's not speaking up in the face of really something that should never again have seen the light of day, a trial that would never have been brought against any other person aside from Donald Trump.
But does the RNC support his bid?
The respect of anyone. Well,
he doesn't deserve the respect of anyone?
He doesn't deserve the respect of anyone in the Republican Party at this point. And quite frankly, anybody in America, if that's the way you feel, that's very upsetting to hear that.
So are you willing to cede the Senate seat in Maryland to the Democratic Party and not support Larry Hogan?
What I'll tell you is that we, of course, want to win as a party, but that is a shame. And I think he should have thought long and hard before he said that publicly.
That's insane. I mean, that's harsher than any Republican official said about any of the January 6th condemnations. Anyway, so what does that say to you about where the GOP's at?
And there was some poll, again, take all these polls with a little bit of several grains of salt at this point, but it's like 55-35 people saying they agreed with the verdict. Now, that's mostly capturing just the partisan split, but it's capturing the fact that maybe there's 10% of those voters in the middle who are Trump inclined, assuming the race is 45-45, right? Yeah. But who are sort of willing to say, yes, that verdict might have been correct. Now, a lot of them are then going to say, but it's not a reason to vote for Biden. But the more it seems to me that Licevita and Lara Trump and these people make this a sort of defining issue of Trump loyalty, if you're one of those voters in the middle, don't you think, well, if this is a defining matter for Trump, what does that say about Trump and about, can I really continue to rationalize my vote for Trump as it's not really about any of these other things that I don't like about Trump? So I think it's had a little more effect than people expected. Biden's statement was very good on Friday. I thought the 90 seconds he added to his Middle East speech, I was sort of down at the dumps early Friday morning that, oh my God, Biden's going to give a long speech on the Middle East and not even mention this. And there were people apparently counseling that in Democratic circles. He did choose to mention it. I don't know if that was because he thought it was the right thing to do, which it was, in my view, as president, or whether they had some polling and focus group data that suggested it was, confirmed my sense that it's, or the other data sense that it's not a bad thing not a bad sort of issue to use against Trump. Now, they haven't followed up much over the weekend. It was the weekend. But I am nervous that they will do what they've done in this, as in so many other instances, have a one-shot little offensive and not have a sustained effort. I do think it's one of those. Look, there are a lot of issues that Biden's on the losing side of, fairly or unfairly, inflation and immigration. This is an issue he's on the winning side of. He's basically with a majority of the American public. You've got to hammer that kind of issue home in a close race, I think.
Yeah, let's talk about the Democratic side of this first. I've got some more Republican delusion to get into, but you tweeted this morning, I noticed, from Michael Tomasky over at the New Republic. He says, Democrats, the ball's in your court. You can buy into the lazy and apparently wrong conventional wisdom that says the verdict will make no difference, or you can create a reality in which the verdict makes a big difference. And that's sort of supporting your point. It's not just him out there. Dan Pfeiffer was making a similar argument. Others, I was on MS. We were hashing this out with a few different people that had differing views. I was making the Pfeiffer and Tomasky and Kristol argument. I think that they're going to do this. I think that they have to. To me, what this really comes down to is one. I think that there's a substantive case. Let's just take the politics out of it for a second. That this should be made. That America doesn't want to have a felon convict as president. That people shouldn't have. We shouldn't have a felon as president. That if Donald Trump wins, then I think it contributes to the idea that he won't leave if he thinks that there's jail on the other side of the presidency. So I think that there's some real substantive concerns here. And then on the political side, the people the Democrats need to get to are the people that aren't listening to the Bulwark Podcast, right? Like the people that are paying, that are lower. Every poll says this. The people that are paying less attention to this race is who Joe Biden's underperforming with. This is something that can break through with them if they carry the message. So to me, on both the substance and the politics, like they have to lean in and not be worried about the bad faith Republican attacks that they're politicizing the justice system or whatever. What say you to that notion?
I totally agree. And I would just add one footnote on the political side. I think there are some of those also swingish, let's call them middle class, upper middle class, college educated Republican voters who didn't vote for Haley and aren't crazy about Trump. I think it's the kind of thing, convicted felon, they're not used to in their businesses having a CEO who's a convicted felon. They're not used to hiring convicted felon. Think it's great to have a convicted felon as the coach of their kids' little league baseball team, or focused on that because I went to so many little league baseball games this weekend, but or the pastor of their church or whatever. I just feel like it's something that could hit home a little bit. It should be put in a broader context of his general loathing and contempt for the rule of law and his promises to violate it in 10 other ways. But it is a kind of a proof, isn't it, that he's not, it's not just the tweets, right? He actually carried out a conspiracy to violate the law.
Yeah. I think that also they have to make sure that they win this argument over whether it's politicized. And in some ways, maybe this feels counterintuitive, but I could understand why some in the Axelrod was making this argument and others that like, boy, you don't want to play into the Republicans' hands and make this seem like it's very political and that Donald Trump didn't deserve this, right? That this was some kind of persecution. Then the thought there that'd be put forth by Axelrod, et cetera, is like, well, if you don't talk about it as much, then maybe it doesn't seem like you were politicizing this, like you were staying above the fray. And with respect to that, they have to actually win the argument that this wasn't political. And to me, that means going out there and reminding people that, Donald Trump is a convicted felon in this case. By the way, there are 3 other cases where he's been indicted. He was found liable in civil court for sexual assault and for fraudulent business records. Then there was the Trump University case from before he was even a politician, where the business was found liable for fraud. And by the way, he's surrounded by a bunch of criminals. There are a bunch of other criminals that are in his orbit from Stone. And so they have to go out and make that case to put so that people have the armor, the rhetorical armor to push back against their friends when they meet them, when this comes up over a beer or on the sidelines of a Little League baseball game, and they're like, this seems politicized. It's like, no, actually, this is just a guy that has a long history of criminal activity. Like, the Democrats have to make that case to people because a lot of people don't know that.
Or they
or they don't think about it that deeply. Maybe don't know. They don't think about it
over. They're willing to put it aside. I agree with you. Some don't know. Some are just willing to put it aside gently to focus on what they don't like about Biden, immigration or inflation or something else. He's old, and you need to drag it back into front and center stage. I very much agree with that. You don't have the choice anymore of different circumstances. A year and a half before an election, I don't know. You could choose. This issue, I'm not going to highlight this. I'm going to highlight something else. It's June. What is it? June 3rd. I mean, it's getting this is an issue, and as I say, I think
we're 3 weeks away from the first debate.
Yeah. And I think your point is, I hadn't really focused on the downside of not making it a case. If Trump gets away with this, the whole raft of legal and ethical issues almost gets undercut, it feels to me like. You're not going to make a big deal of the fact that an actual jury convicted him of 34 felonies, but we're very upset that he used a term about the uniting the Reich or whatever, one of those things. Yeah. That stuff is not as important, actually, and it is more just beating him up for idiotic things and offensive things, don't get me wrong, that he's saying, and dangerous things sometimes, but still it's more speculative, you might say. This is real. And so I agree. If you don't do this, you're sort of seeding that whole mess of ethical and legal issues that should be used against Trump.
Yeah. There's another point that Joe Biden has that I think he's going to be reluctant to use, but his allies should, related to this conversation about the politicized Justice Department. As we were talking today, Hunter Biden is going into a courtroom in Wilmington, Delaware, named after J. Caleb Boggs. It's the J. Caleb Boggs courthouse, and Caleb Boggs was the guy that Joe Biden defeated in a shocking upset that got him into the Senate in the first place. So, everything comes around in politics. So Hunter Biden goes in there today. He is in separate trial. This is on the gun charges where he lied on the document about whether he was using drugs when he got a gun. And then he has a separate trial later this year on tax fraud charges. It's almost like, do I have to say it? Yeah. It seems pretty silly that we spent a whole weekend listening to half the country and even some like quasi-respected people arguing that Joe Biden is masterminding some DOJ plot to target his political foes while his only surviving son is walking into a courtroom today, a federal courtroom. I mean, this. I know that Joe Biden put out a statement about this morning that was mostly just about how he loves his son. And so, Joe Biden's not going to be making this case, but shouldn't the Democrats just be banging the drum on this as loud as possible?
Yeah. And I cringed a little bit over the last week when Hunter Biden, for whatever sort of, well, partly was the anniversary of Beau Biden's death, was with Joe Biden a fair amount. And then I think he and President and Mrs. Biden wanted to be with Hunter Biden last night in Delaware, and he was at the state dinner. So I thought, could he just maybe, doesn't have to see his adult son every 2 days, but I think in a way I was, he loves him. He wants to show support. And in a certain way, you could even say that strengthens the fact, doesn't it, that he's letting the Justice Department go ahead with no interference at all in a case that he almost certainly deep down believes is unjustified, and a lot of respectable people have qualms about. But again, he doesn't raise that, so in a way he deserves even more credit, I'd say, because it's clearly very painful to him. It's not some distant relative or brother he hasn't gotten along with for 20 years or whatever kind of thing.
About the black sheep or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so that yes, I think others could make this point.
Yeah, and I think that what you kind of alluded to there, even for those who think that the Bragg case was weak or frivolous or whatever, I think Ben Wittes made a pretty strong argument against that on the Friday podcast. But even if you were to say that it's like, okay, this is sort of frivolous that you would charge a former president with this, it does feel like there was some politics there. Like, that is Hunter Biden is not on trial for like drug smuggling. Like, he is on trial today for a paperwork error. And even if you want to take if you want to diminish the Trump conviction, and use rhetoric to diminish this as much as possible. You can say it was a paperwork error. It was a misfiling, right, of business records, and it shouldn't have been taken so seriously. That's all the Hunter thing is, right? Like it is, and so that is just how the justice system works. It's particularly how the justice system works if you volunteer to put yourself in front of the cameras every day, and like that's part of the risk of doing business. But there was a long time where we expected more from our people in public service, and that that's the scrutiny comes with it, and that was part of what was like commonly accepted in political life, and that is just another thing that's been debased.
Incidentally, the stronger cases, or the more important, I will think it's fair, cases, January 6th, the classified documents, why are we? It's not like those of us who believe in the rule of law wanted the Bragg case to come first. We didn't control it. It's a federal system. Biden didn't interfere. But why aren't those other cases up there? Because Trump and Trump-friendly judges, but leave aside even the judges, Trump himself has tried to delay those cases as much as possible. That's not like a theoretical statement or a fancy argument about how if you look in the details of his pleadings, he's cleverly moving it off. He literally has asked that these cases be put off time and time again, whether it's the Supreme Court with the January 6th case or with Cannon. And that's what he's actually arguing. Now, he's entitled to argue that as a legal matter. He can say this one isn't ripe yet, or I need more time for this, or this has to be adjudicated before we can do that. But that is he is the one who's responsible for us not dealing with the, quote, more serious cases, not the anti-Trump forces, which, of course, the Wall Street Journal and all these Trump enablers and apologists. And can I say, incidentally, they are worse than ever, the Wall Street Journal. We have not spent enough time criticizing the Wall Street Journal editorial page, even though you and I are slightly obsessed with this and do criticize them some. The degree of sophistry and dishonesty and just apology for terrible things that they're peddling is really extraordinary and doing real damage. Anyway, but it's Trump who wants us not to be able to judge his behavior in the, quote, more important cases.
Yeah. And by the way, that also speaks to this point. Again, I feel I'm going to be a crazy person. Everybody just has to deal with this podcast over the next 3 months, just speaking to everybody like idiots to just help, because I want everyone to be able to have this language with them, because, sometimes it's just hard to navigate, the farrago of bullshit that these guys put out about, what is happening, with the Justice Department, how Trump's being targeted, how it's so unfair. And even like Susan Collins is like convinced by this, like Joe Bragg. It's like, if Joe Biden was masterminding this, if the never Trump forces were masterminding this, wow, we wouldn't have picked the Bragg case to go first. You know what I mean? Like if Joe Biden was was a puppeteer behind the curtain, the Jack Smith case in D.C. would have would be the one with Judge Chutkan, but this has gotten delayed thanks to Trump's buddies on the Supreme Court and other interference. Anyway, to the Wall Street Journal thing, I wasn't going to bring this up, but you mentioned it, so I had to pull it up. If people aren't reading JVL's newsletter, the Triad, you really should go to thebulwark.com and sign up. Here was Peggy Noonan last week. She wrote this. The tragedy of this campaign is that one of two old men, neither of them great, neither of them distinguished in terms of character or intellect, who are in each way an embarrassment, and whom 2/3 of voters do not want as presidential candidates, will be chosen in this crucial historic moment in which the stakes could not be higher. Then she goes on, when was the last time you saw anyone try to address the other side with respect and understanding? This is like, you do feel like you're in an insane asylum, right? Where you're like, how can you? What is the comparison here exactly between Trump and Biden on these points?
And the Journal editorial itself, that is the editorials on the editorial page, not one of their regular writers like Peggy Noonan. I think this was on Thursday or Friday morning. I think Bob Kagan called it to my attention because I can't really read it anymore. It just gets me too annoyed. The Journal editorial said with a straight face, Mr. Bragg might have opened a new destabilizing era of American politics, and no one can say how it will end. Really? Alvin Bragg opened a destabilizing era of American politics? Didn't some stuff happen before Alvin Bragg decided to bring this case in 2023 that was kind of destabilizing? That's the editorial page. That's not one columnist. That's presumably goes through some process where they look at each other's work and so forth. I mean, how pathetic is that?
Take some accountability. Criticize Joe Biden, criticize Alvin Bragg all you want, but like this notion that this like just broad attempt to wave hands and muddy the waters and be like, boy, look at how the Democrats have been breaking the norms too. It's just all like I forget if it was. I've been doing too much content lately, Bill, so I forget if it was on this podcast. So excuse me, listeners, if I already did this on the podcast. But did you see the Politico story last week about the Alito thing? About how Joe Biden hadn't weighed in on Alito and how progressive groups were mad at him for not attacking Alito harder. Like, this is the position that Joe Biden is at, right? Like, he can do what all of these folks at the Wall Street Journal Ed Board claim that they want him to do, and rise above it, not engage in petty partisan bickering. And they give him no credit. Like, there was no one editorial on the Wall Street Journal page. It's like, good on Joe Biden for not going down in the gutter on these Sam Alito attacks. So he gets no credit for it when he rises above, and then he gets attacked by us, like the left, for not being more aggressive. Like, it's just it exposes how bad faith these attacks are from them. That, like, there's nothing he can do to get credit. It can, they only just look for opportunities to try to smear him to make it seem like he's the same as Trump.
Totally. I mean, he incidentally, I think I wrote this last week in one of the morning shots, that he would be entitled, in my view, to not to go down to the gutter or anything, but he to make a point about the kind of jurisprudence that Thomas and Alito believe in, that it produced Dobbs along with the Trump nominees, those two plus the Trump nominees, to the court. And that it's going to produce other things in the next 4 years if Trump gets another 4 years to appoint maybe Supreme Court justices and certainly federal court judges. That is a totally legitimate argument for candidate Joe Biden to make and for President Joe Biden to make about the future of the country. And whether he shouldn't say Alito and Thomas by name. He should just say the kinds of justices Donald Trump likes and whom he will appoint. But it's perfectly legit. And the moment he does that, the Wall Street Journal editorial page and every high-toned conservative columnist and anti-Trump type and Ross Douthat, that will all be pearl-clutching about how, this is terrible. He says he's the institutionalist, but how now he's criticizing Supreme Court justices. But if he does, to his credit, Biden, he's done it a little, but not as much as he could have, incidentally. I mean, they want to make a big issue of Dobbs, but the way to do that, honestly, is a forward-looking. That's already happened, Dobbs, and states are doing what they're doing. Is a forward-looking argument about contraception, about all the implications of things that Thomas and Alito have said they care about. And I worry a little that Biden is holding back from making that criticism because he's worried that he will look like he's politicizing stuff, but it's a totally unfair criticism. He's very much entitled to raise the issue of what kinds of court appointments is the next president going to make. Speaking
of things he could raise, I'm just throwing this out there. I agree with your high-minded points, but, could they not do a 15-second TikTok video where Joe Biden's raising the flag right side up? Just being like, so unlike the insurrectionist court justices, unlike my opponent's son, unlike the Heritage Foundation, I still love America and think that the flag should be raised in the proper manner.
This is great minds working alike, was in the morning shots this morning, which got posted a little late, so we haven't read it before we went on this thing, I think. I say something like, shouldn't Biden just stroll out of the White House today and gesture to the flag and say, you know what, it's a wonderful thing I'm so proud to be in this White House and to represent the American public, and so proud that we fly the flag every day. And he doesn't even have to say right side up, though he could say those words if he wanted to really dig it in a little more. But yes, I agree that they're, in fact, they do bend over too much backwards, in my opinion. I mean, Garland never says anything, obviously. Biden has a real sense of restraint about it. And they don't have many surrogates either who are very much, who are more than just random, not to insult them, but, members of Congress or whatever. Yeah. So there's no one who kind of has the weight to get a lot of coverage if he says a version of what I just said or what you just said.
It's got to be Joe. All right.
He does need to do it. He needs to make I think the upside down flag is really appalling. And you maybe have discussed this already 5 times on the podcast. I don't know, but not so much. I mean, I went to the Little League games on Saturday and there was the flag flying. I thought, you know what? America's a great country and it's nice that they have a flag and it's nice these kids are many in my area. It's maybe 60% Biden, 40% Trump, but plenty of the parents and coaches and umpires on these teams are not Biden supporters necessarily. Yeah. A lot of them are Republicans and some of them are Trump supporters. And you know what? They're playing Little League and it's a great country. And it's not a country where the flag should be flown upside down. The country's not in distress because Trump was convicted.
Yeah, no, exactly. This is the thing. Look, people should do political protest all they want, but these people are denigrating America and turning the flag upside down over a total lie. I mean, here's some of the right wing. We did a little bit of this with Phillips on Friday, but here's some more since then. The Montana Republican Senate candidate Sheehy is out with a new ad today that says that Donald Trump is suffering, quote, state-sponsored political persecution led by Joe Biden. Like, that's just a lie. TV stations shouldn't air that. That's just a lie. Let's see. We've got Tim Scott was saying Joe Biden's two-tiered injustice system. He's weaponizing the justice system against his opponent. That's a lie. 10 Republicans now, since we last spoke in the Senate, have said that they're unwilling to pass anything else this year besides national security related stuff. So that's appointments. It's approving people to jobs in the administration. It's any bipartisan legislation. It's things like the Farm Bill. They're working on a Farm Bill right now. I guess we're not going to do the Farm Bill because of Alvin Bragg. Based Mike Lee is leading that effort. I guess they think this is a political winner for them. Again, I think this can be used against them. Do people really want, isn't this online brain? Like, do people really want this? Like, they want the whole government to stop working because of a jury verdict in New York?
Just from a conventional political analysis point of view, I think everyone has been saying kind of correctly that if this election is about Biden's job approval, Biden's in deep trouble because he's underwater as the incumbent president. If the election is about Trump's favorability, he's in some considerable trouble because he has always been unfavorable, had a majority viewing him unfavorably, and that remains the case. Doesn't all this hoopla make it more about Trump than Biden's? From a very practical but legitimate political point of view, not low road, just kind of political thinking. Don't we want a 3 weeks here of discussion of the Trump of the trial and of Trump world's reaction to the trial, which does bring out, we discussed this a little recently, I think, which does bring out the extremism, I think, of MAGA. It's not just, that there's a whole movement here, which is just willing to say at the drop of a hat, the justice system's illegitimate. Everything is corrupt. The country's in horrible shape. Let's fly the flag upside down. That is not where people are. And so I think this is the right thing to say, to argue, the right argument to have, but also a politically wise argument to have.
Yeah, and unwise for them. And I do think like putting some meat on the bones of like what should in DC, the smart set is like, well, it's an election year. The people aren't going to do anything anyway. This is all for show. Who cares about the Mike Lee thing? But I don't, I think you could take a high-minded, this is where your congressional surrogates can work. This is where Chris Murphy's and Brian Schatz's and Abigail, the folks that have social, Jasmine Crockett, who was on last week, can't go out and say, no, actually, there's stuff we could do this year. Like, this immigration bill that Donald Trump killed. There's things we could do to make the border better. We are working on the Farm Bill right now. That is important for working class people who need their SNAP benefits, for farmers that need to know what the new rules are going to be going forward. So, like, there are things we could do. We're going to need to appoint people to various positions at the government that do have real jobs, real responsibilities, and like these guys say no because they're having a temper tantrum. I think that there's a way to kind of take the middle ground there and educate people about just the real ramifications of the crazy.
Agreed.
I want to talk about some of Donald Trump was on Fox and Friends. I don't know if did you suffer through that? Have you?
No, but I saw little clips of it.
You saw some.
You actually chose Tim, so I don't have to. That's my view.
I know. I was really enjoying myself this week. I do have to say, I was flying home from New York, and Delta. Great. This is a free ad for Delta. They do a nice job. You've got the live TV. If you're a Sky Miles member, they give you free internet. They're not nickel and diming yet like these other airlines. So I was just flipping through all those Sunday shows. And just really reveling in watching all these guys squirm. Anyway, here is Donald Trump's plan for the military in the next term.
Are you going to fire those generals, the woke generals at the top? Because people have been talking about it.
Yes, I would get rid of them, yeah. But see, now I know them. I didn't know them before. I came in, what do I know? I was a New York real estate person, but no, I'd fire them. I would fire them. You can't have woke military.
Okay. So, Joe Biden's off to France on Thursday to commemorate the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Donald Trump's planning on firing the generals in the military because he thinks they're too woke. I don't know. He thinks that they care too much about black people or something. I don't exactly know what the substantive criticism is there. What say you on that split screen?
I mean, again, the wise people in D.C. say foreign policy doesn't matter. I still think at the end of the day, Commander-in-Chief, if Biden looks, which he will, I think, sober and serious and behaves appropriately in France, and Trump is saying these things on the other hand, again, Biden is going to stay high road when he's abroad, as he should. There should be surrogates, and that would be, again, they can do two things at once. They can do Trump's conviction, but they can also have people who've served in senior positions, including in Republican administrations, out on TV saying, this is dangerous, what Trump is saying. It undercuts us. I mean, at home, obviously, to start firing generals for political reasons. Also, countries abroad, people abroad will look at this and say, is this a serious country and so forth? So, yeah, I think it should be taken. I suggested on Twitter that Biden also, most of what's happening is in Normandy, and then he has, I think, a state visit. He presumably has a dinner with Macron and all this, but he should think about going, I think it's 50 miles from Paris to the cemetery that Trump didn't go to when it was drizzling or maybe raining. I don't remember in 2018, and where he made his comments to John Kelly about suckers and losers, the cemetery that's right near Belleau Wood where Marines fought in 1918. It would be kind of a nice, he could just say, I'm just going to pay my respects. We did Normandy for World War II. I also want to pay respects to the Americans who fought in World War I. Never mentioned Trump, obviously. It would be kind of a nice, maybe it's a little too trolly, but I don't know. I just feel like it's apparently a very beautiful cemetery too. I've not been, so yeah.
Maybe. I think that at minimum, just an explicit case about this commitment to our allies, commitment to democratic principles, commitment to the things that those who died at Normandy fought for. It was interesting. I saw I was watching your conversation with James Carville. And Carville makes kind of an aside point, as he's known to, rapid fire points. But one of them was kind of an aside, and I don't know if you guys ever got back around to it. But if you look at the numbers, one of the groups that Biden is doing better with than expected is older voters, particularly older white voters. I remember this from 2016 too, that that group was kind of the slowest to come along with Trump. And I do think that there really is, at least maybe only on the margins, but at some level, like a recognition for people that either, as we saw, some there's some veterans that are still traveling over there, they're still alive, or their family, their younger siblings, their kids, a lot of them had kids when they're 18, so their kids are pretty old, so their kids, that remember that look at Trump and the echo is just a little too loud for them to the bad times, to the Mussolinis. I don't know. What, am I overthinking that? Do you think?
You're totally correct. And again, I think the smart, always like how many voters is going to move. Well, I don't know, 1%, 2%, 3%. And plus it's the right thing to do. Obviously, it was very moving. I thought the video of the 100-year-old really soldiers and landing at Charles de Gaulle Airport and being applauded by, I guess, some expat Americans, but I guess mostly French men and women waving American flags, right side up American flags, to thank these people. 80 years later? It's kind of amazing, isn't it? I mean, for D-Day, it wouldn't be bad for President Biden to quote President Reagan's very famous remarks, obviously on the 40th anniversary. He doesn't have to say anything about I'm being bipartisan here, but it would be a nice put him in the tradition of Reagan, so to speak. And there are still some Reagan Republicans, some of them, unfortunately, a little bit tempted to go to Trump. So I don't know. I think this trip could be a pretty a plus for Biden, and I mean, obviously it's important for the country in all kinds of ways in terms of NATO and what he says abroad, and appropriate thing for a president to do. But particularly because Trump's most recent, the Trump trip to France that got the most attention was where he refused to go to a cemetery with American Marines in that case.
Indeed, it really was a moving video of the vets. We'll have Katie. We'll put it in the show notes if anybody didn't see it over the weekend. All right, one more clip from Donald's appearance on Fox and Friends. Maybe the only interesting question that the trio of Fox hosts asked him was whether the American people are ready for the reality of what the biggest deportation in history would look like. And let's hear what Donald Trump said about that.
Do you think the public will have the appetite, the stomach for watching deportations on their television screen?
Well, that question is so great and so tough. Because, the radical left is going to start saying, oh, look, so you'll get rid of 10 really bad ones. And one, beautiful mother who they think is guilty of something, and maybe she is, maybe. And it'll become a story. Or a family that's a good family and came in wrong, and they're going to show it. Then it's going to always be tough. It's not going to be easy. And we have to use a lot of good judgment. But the way you get rid of them is the local police. The local police know these people by their first name, their middle name, and their last name. The local police are great. They're just not allowed to do their job. They're afraid of losing their pension. They're afraid of losing their wife or husband. They're going to lose their house. They're losing everything. And one of the things I'm doing is giving local police immunity from prosecution.
Oh boy. Okay, a lot to unpack there, Bill. But the one that really jumps out to me is Trump's little aside. Maybe she's guilty of something, maybe she isn't. And here he is. The whole interview, the whole discussion is about how the justice system is so unfair to him, even though a jury of his peers convicted him unanimously. Now here he is saying, if I get back in by presidential diktat, I'm just going to start sending people on buses out of the country. Maybe they're guilty of something, maybe they aren't, but whatever, it's worth it because we'll get the 10 real bad guys. That cognitive dissonance didn't seem to sink in with anybody on set.
No, but weren't you struck also by there is a way in which Trump is smarter than a lot of his supporters? He is a salesman for 40, 50 years. He's a fraudster and a grifter and all that. But he sort of knows what plays and what doesn't. And he has the sense, I think, you could tell from that, right, that there's some downside to all this macho, insane nativism and deporting a bunch of dreamers who've been here 15 years and a mother with 3 kids who were working hard and so forth and haven't committed a crime, except for they came here, which wasn't a crime exactly, but they're undocumented. And they've been trying to get documented and working hard and paying taxes. I think Trump Trump sort of has more of a sense on this issue as on others like abortion that it's not 100%. Public opinion isn't quite where he is or quite where MAGA is. It comes to one point, Carville always makes so many interesting points in passing on these conversations. Right. In a way, the main themes, honestly, they're great, but I mean, we all, no one has.
We know what James's main opinion is.
Yeah, and they're not that different from a lot of other people's main opinion. There are only so many themes to go around. But the real little insights that he has at times are very good. And I think the one about Trump, at the end of the day, 45% of the country supports him. Hopefully he can knock that down a little. But MAGA really isn't supported by 45% of the country. And in polling, for whatever it's worth, it's got like 25% support. And it's counterintuitive to people who've been fighting Trump maybe for 7 or 8 years to say this, but being a little less Trump focused, a little more MAGA focused, a little more extremism focused might be wise for the Democrats. But I think, again, and to get tied back with what we've been talking about, the reaction to the verdict in some sense that the Trump verdict is could be as damaging as the Trump verdict itself, right? I mean, the kind of craziness, the flag stuff, the kind of anti-American stuff that MAGA is into. And I think same here.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of why I think he's been so distracted by the trials. It's kind of why I'm surprised that Trump and Lasavita and them didn't crack down more on Project 2025. Because he is smart. Like he doesn't want to carry all that baggage around his neck of every specific policy item that some random far right weirdo in the bowels of the Heritage Foundation thinks, so that what Stephen Miller's, what's happened in his warped mind, like Donald Trump doesn't want to have to carry all of that as part of his actual platform, and he has had to now. And you see him when he is actually talking extemporaneously, he tries to wiggle out of that stuff as much as possible. Though I will say, the one other substantive thing which he says repeatedly, which I think that in his mind he thinks is just, I'm just supporting the cops, not the Capitol Police, but or the FBI, but the good cops, the cops he likes. Like in practice, again, it speaks to the danger of what Trump is what plans. Like if you think about this, it's like what his proposal is when just put directly instead of in his like roundabout Queen's way of talking is, okay, we're going to give the green light to deport as many people as possible. I'm going to empower local police jurisdictions to do that. And then we're going to give them immunity. So if they do anything that's improper, they don't got to worry about that. They don't got to worry about all the paperwork. They can rough people up. They can take people. They can, they can fudge around the edges. And in certain jurisdictions, won't be in all jurisdictions, but in certain jurisdictions, like where they have crazy sheriffs, like in Arizona and stuff, we're going to give these guys carte blanche. Like, that's very ominous.
Yeah, totally. And he wants, I think, immunity for police and law enforcement, period, not just on immigration issues. So, I mean, that really is crazy. I mean, we want police forces. No one can be disciplined for anything they do when they're wearing the uniform of a law enforcement official. That's not healthy. They already have too much immunity. We had a good piece on this at the Bulwark about a week ago, the quote qualified immunity, which is which is pretty close to absolute already, frankly, and allows for an awful lot of bad police behavior. But that's always a difficult line to exactly where to put that. But certainly the absolute immunity is a terrible idea. Yeah, Trump really has a 1989 New York mentality about this, right? You can't go wrong being on the side of the cops against the criminals. And that was certainly true for Rudy Giuliani in 1993. And it was true in New York politics for a while and a lot of politics.
What happens when the cops are the criminals or when the candidate is the criminal?
And it's one thing to be to react against excessive left-wing, criticism and micromanagement of cops or whatever the semi-legitimate cases were in the 80s and 90s. That's, again, the immunity issue. Maybe, again, I'm sure Biden's advisors are nervous about taking that on. So you don't want to appear pro-criminal and anti-cop. And Biden's always been actually pretty pro-police in a legitimate way. But I think precisely because he has been pro-police, saying this is really a recipe for authoritarianism. And this is literally saying the president, you do whatever you want, and the president's going to make sure you pay no price if you beat up some innocent person, kill him, whatever, right? Abuse, do all kinds of other things as a law enforcement officer. So I think, again, I don't know whether this is a wise one to highlight or not, but as an actual governing matter, it's very scary. You have a guy who's willing to embolden vigilante groups to act on his behalf. You have a guy who's willing to give every law enforcement officer in America, there are almost 1 million, I think, apparently absolute immunity. You have a guy who's willing to pardon people who commit crimes. We know the J6 hostages. You put all that together, that's authoritarianism.
All right, final topic. I saved this one for the end. Dessert. Our friend Dean Phillips says this: Donald Trump is a serial liar, cheater, and philanderer, a 6-time declarer of corporate bankruptcy, an instigator of insurrection, and a convicted felon who thrives on portraying himself as a victim. That's good, Dean. I liked that. Next sentence, though. Kathy Hochul should pardon him for the good of the country. I don't know. I'm not like, this is absurd. I don't know. Where I fall on this is, if I thought that we were dealing with a counterparty in a democracy where the people on the other side would acknowledge and give credit for, that type of action, then I would maybe think that it'd be worth listening to. But I don't know that that's true. I think that that then the Republicans and Trump would just say, this shows that it was politicized from the start. They're pardoning me because they know, right? So to me, I just don't think there's any argument for it. But sometimes you're a contrarian, Bill. So I thought maybe you and Dean might agree on this one.
No, not on this. If 2 years from now there's a jail sentence and Trump's been defeated and is sort of retired, and Kathy Hochul wants to commute the sentence to time, to good behavior or whatever, wearing an ankle bracelet at Mar-a-Lago, I could live with that. But not now. And what about these other pending cases? Again, these guys all want to be kind of clever contrarian. Does Dean Phillips believe that all the other cases should just be dropped? The January 6th case, the classified documents case, which is an absolute clear-cut case of his misbehavior, illegal behavior, breaking the law, and then trying to cover up breaking the law and getting others incriminated in that. I don't know. So, no, I think at this point, there are times when, Ford, Nixon kind of thing. Yes, if Trump loses, retires from politics, says he's never going to do, dissolves MAGA, as it were, and goes into some grumpy, golf playing retirement, could there be a case for not letting every prosecution go forward and not letting jail terms go forward? Yes, but we're not anywhere near there.
Indeed, we're not. We're so not near there. I had this dark thought over the weekend. I was like, even if we beat Trump, then the 2028 Republican primary campaign will still be totally run on whether you'll give blanket immunity and pardon to Trump. Like that will be an anti, willingness to pardon Trump if you beat whoever the Democrat comes out to be. So like we have a minimum of, where are we? 2024. We have a minimum of like 4.5 years left of Trump pardon discussions, no matter what happens this November. Anyway, unless he dies. Bill Kristol, thank you. It's been too long. Good to be back. If you want more Bill Kristol, we'll put his conversation with James Carville, the Raging Cajun, in the show notes. It was 51 minutes. I don't know if it was an uplifting 51 minutes, but, to each their own. You might enjoy it. We'll see you back here next Monday. Thanks so much, Bill.
Thanks, Tim.
All right. And we will be back tomorrow. We got a doubleheader, so it's going to be a good one. Check you all then. Peace.